Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
We are talking tonight about the essentials of research methods in education, a book by Scott Buckler and Harriet Moore, who we are lucky enough to have joining us. So I'm just going to check that they have joined us in the space. Scott, Harriet, are you there?
We are
Hi,
here.
Nathan.
Hi.
Good to hear you.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff, and we are in the middle of the summer holidays, I should say, for most people, I should say, actually, because, we do have people from other areas who will be listening in, who potentially, I know some people go back earlier, some start a little bit earlier or get their year up and running. But for me, where I am and a lot of UK teachers, we are right in the middle, and I have luckily hit a bit of sunshine. I think 2 days worth of sunshine I've got coming up as we go. But before we get started, it's probably really important, particularly for a lot of our listeners, to get to know both of you a little bit as well. So before we get started talking about the book, which we will talk about a lot because it is wonderful, and I've had the chance to read through it. I've got it sat next to me in front of me, and
Fantastic.
we will talk. We'll talk a little bit later, but I do love the cover, and I do want to There's something about a good looking book. This is a good looking book, and you can see it there actually. If you have a look there at Harriet's logo, which is the one just next to mine in the space, you'll see a little cover of there. And what we'll do is we'll get a tweet pinned up as well, so that you can see what we're talking about. But before we get started, Scott, Harriet, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, set the scene about what you currently do.
Thanks, Nathan. Well, I've been teaching. I'm coming into my 29th year in education, and I qualified as a primary school teacher. I taught in London, in Birmingham. Then I moved into universities for a significant period of time. I realised I was losing or becoming detached from practice. So in 2017, I returned to the classroom, and I've worked in a range of settings, starting off as a teaching assistant, an A-level psychology teacher, but then I came across this wonderful all-through single academy school called Holy Trinity School in Kidderminster. For those of you who don't know, Kidderminster's southwest of Birmingham. And since returning to the classroom, I've qualified as a chartered teacher, got qualifications in psychology, but really what my role is I take or I'm in charge of computing and IT across the school. So that's EYFS up to A level. And although when I say I'm in charge of it, I'm about the only person who teaches it, I think. That's not to discredit any other teachers in the school who do actually teach it. But that's my role. So currently I lead on computing, and I drink copious amounts of coffee with my colleague Harriet.
There is a lot of coffee consumed in this department of IT. So yeah, I'm Harriet. I'm currently the IT operations manager at Holy Trinity. I run a technical department of me. This comes with loads of challenges that you'd expect. It's balancing the proactive with the reactive side of IT, but I enjoy the problem solving side of it. That's something I find really interesting. My background, however, isn't IT. My degree was in animal behaviour, which comes in really handy with students and staff alike sometimes.
Thank you. Harriet just looked at me. Thank you, Harriet.
No comment. When I finished that, I moved initially into the post of a lab technician at the school at Holy Trinity, and that gave me some really good lab experiences in research lab experience. That was really good for me. And then I moved over into the IT department. In the IT department, I've been, well, like I say, it's the technical team of one. I've also taught Key Stage 3 IT. But I decided that where I really wanted to be was the technical side of it. And I wanted to pick up the other roles of education. So I managed the school's Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, more specifically the expedition side of it. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I really do believe that education is far more than just the classroom-based learning. Nathan, I know you have a background in outdoor ed, so I'm sure you're kind of aware of that, how important that is. So yeah, that's kind of a bit about us, really, I guess.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, I know. I think that it's so interesting as well, hearing about different schools, different steps, and all through school. And this maybe might feed into some of the kind of uh, I should say it's my own personal stereotypes, I guess I'm talking about, how people maybe engage with research, how confident people are with it, teachers as well. And that, I was a primary school teacher trained, and I don't want to paint myself maybe wrong, but you kind of said, I did start from an outdoor background, maybe not necessarily as academic maybe as I would perceive A-level teachers or those kind of levels. And so I do find it. Do you notice a difference between maybe how people sort of perceive an approach to research and academia between the primary and the secondary kind of sectors?
Really good question, Nathan. I think research has got this big myth around it that it's really awkward to do, that you've got to be studying for a degree or for a master's or a piece of CPD to really engage with it. I think the perception's wider, though, also, that it isn't just teachers who engage with research. So, we could say that, yes, senior, you would have got that degree in the subject that you teach, prep or primary, then you'd have that background in all different subjects. But I think there's an emphasis that we need more discussions between each other, and I think that's really the advantage of this all through school we work in. That we can have open, honest perceptions. We can break down those walls and bring that in to something like our book. Harriet, anything you want to say on that?
I just want to add into that. As I said, I have been a classroom teacher in the past, but I'm not at the moment. And I think it's very important to make sure that those discussions are had with other members of the educational village that makes the school work, really.
Yeah. When you talk about it like that, when I think about maybe some of the other roles and the expectations on people to do research, for instance, I've never necessarily heard of a teaching assistant doing research, although they may well be best placed, or they should be doing it. Maybe that's something we can get onto later. But I want to ask you, first of all, because we are discussing your book, Essentials of Research Methods in Education. It is from Sage Publishing. I should say as well, if you look at the top of our tweet of our space and you're listening to this, there is a discount code there for Sage where you can get 25% off the books. So if you click on that tweet, you'll be able to see the discount code for it there. But the book itself has these pit stop activities to get me thinking while I'm reading it. They were great. But I wanted to put you on the spot by flipping one of the early ones that you've put in there on its head and asking it to you. So this is how the question comes, this kind of thinking activity from the book. It says, imagine you're making a documentary about educational research for a mainstream television audience. A few minutes into the program, you need to define what educational research is. Aim to write your definition in one sentence. Well, you asked it of me as the reader, so I'm throwing that back.
What do they say? Never.
How would your definition of educational research be?
Yeah. So what do they say? Never ask a question of somebody else that you're not prepared to answer yourself. Yes. So simply put, and we do actually state this in the book, we feel that the definition of educational research is the collection and analysis of information relating to education in an attempt to explore, explain, and enhance the profession. Now, obviously, that's still quite a mouthful, and that's why there is discussion and the book coming through with this. So let's unpick some sort of bits and pieces. So, for example, what is education? Does education mean schooling? Those sorts of things. And it's kind of what I said a bit ago. Education is so much more than just the formal curriculum. And research is more than just crunching the numbers. For example, studying children's drawings, such as ones that we've highlighted in the book. So shout out to the kids, to Beatrix, to Cameron, and to Chloe, to say that it's more than just that crunching the numbers.
So I think really from that, there's three words to pick up from that quote. That's explore, explain, and enhance. So in terms of exploring, it concerns wanting to find out something, the what if. the type of question, or the why does this happen type of question. It's something that makes you think that things could be done better. So from what Harriet is saying about children's drawings, hopefully we've got some early years practitioners listening in, and they're surrounded by an array of data all the time. So yeah, just taking 3 different children's drawings on a concept, you can really get to grips with what they've drawn, why they've drawn it, how they discuss, how they talk about it. And we could think, well, why? Why have they done this? What that sense of exploration moves on to the explaining. So by explaining, we need to obtain data from whatever format to see if we can answer the questions that we have set ourselves. But ultimately, it's to enhance. The purpose of educational research is to make the profession better for everyone. I'm a firm believer that education should be a self-enhancing profession. By this, a profession not led from above, but within. And when we say within, these ideals are so fundamental to places like the Chartered College of Teaching, led by the wonderful Alison Peacock. But it's that striving to be the best we can to improve our practice. And this is against all levels. Earlier you mentioned about teaching assistants. Certainly when I was working in university, I was working with teaching assistants on their research projects. Many of them went on to degrees. Some have moved on to becoming head teachers even. So, we've got to acknowledge that there is this wider research culture within a school. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer there, but explore, explain, and enhance.
No. Explore, explain, enhance, and I really like the simplicity of that. The bit that it didn't come from, and again, this is maybe where I bring my own prejudices, my own stereotypes to what it is, and I will mention that there's an anecdote in the introduction to the book of a friend of yours referring to it as being the most boring book in the world, based on the title. And I fundamentally disagree. I found it really engaging, and I want to ask a little bit about the kind of writing style as well, because I particularly like the way it was kind of narrated, the style in it. But it does kind of get me thinking then. What do you think then most people's, maybe most people in education, I should phrase that as, opinions of research are?
I think a lot of people see research as something that kind of goes on behind closed doors. It's sort of something that happens down in sort of dark, sort of dusty corridors in rambling sort of institutions somewhere tucked away. I get visions of these sort of oldie worldy doors down the side of the corridor. You knock on the door and this sort of cloaked, hooded figure appears and raises a lamp aloft and sort of inquires, "What are you doing here?" That sort of thing. I think there's a huge element of people seeing research as something kind of hidden and inaccessible. The cloaked figure, the academics who sort of act as the gatekeepers, and to go back to it, that those sort of gatekeepers keeping people out from doing it. The notion that the essentials of research methods in education would be the world's most boring book, or words to that effect. It's just adding another block into the way, and that's what we wanted to blow out of the water. We don't want it to be dull and boring and sort of hidden away and cloaked, if you like. We wanted to remove all the potential blocks, and one way to do that was to add the light-hearted touches that we have done in the book, or hopefully that we've done in the book. So we're thinking the things like the drug-taking monkeys, field trips into the paranormal, the little quirky things that sort of make it hopefully not the world's most boring book.
But again, picking up from what Harriet just said, no doubt we've all read research reports, and they can appear quite formulaic in nature. There's a range of terms that can be confusing. For example, what does epistemology mean? How does that differ to ontology? Some papers cite that, some avoid it. And then you may come across something like a research approach like interpretive phenomenological analysis. I can't believe I can say that this time of the afternoon. But what do these all mean? So a lot of these words we can't really get a handle on. So we call this the conceptual quagmire of confusion, because research does get buried in with all these terms. And as Harriet said, we've attempted to demystify all of these aspects of the research process, providing a strong framework for any researcher at any level, whether they're just coming in and cutting their teeth on research, whether first-year university students, whether they're going into their doctorates. So while research can seem daunting, or that other people can question their contribution about what they can actually do within research, or that research is only led by professors, our approach within the book is that anyone can engage in research. We do it daily, from finding out how to get to London during a rail strike, through to looking at patterns in year 10 data. No doubt many of us will be looking at results coming out over the next week or two and thinking, right, what do I need to tweak next year? That's research. I think research, it's clouded, it's got many different layers, but hopefully we can try and simplify it through our book.
Yeah, definitely. And the book was accessible to me. And, I am a qualified teacher. I have a degree, but there are words, and as you rightly say, that there are some words that I don't know how to say, and I get picked up on air sometimes because I pronounce them wrong, because they're words I've only read on the page, and I don't maybe know them so well. But the book certainly does a very good job of explaining and expanding and guiding me through some of those things. I wanted to ask another question, sort of based on that kind of this imagery of sort of wizards in academia. And there is a sentence in the introduction where it talks about this myth and mystery of the research, and one of the quotes there is, "The guardians of the secrets of research carefully seclude in a veil of misconception and mystical words." And this is what I felt certainly at the start of my career, maybe, and admittedly there'd been a while since I'd been to university, and then I'd had a gap doing other stuff, and I came back into teaching, and it was I wasn't in the academia type place, and it felt like another planet to me, and certainly another language to the one that I spoke. And so I wanted to ask you about some of what are the barriers then that teachers are facing? Is it in the language, or are there more things that we need to think about when we're saying, okay, teachers need to be engaging with more research? What are the barriers for teachers on the ground?
So I think it actually, joking apart, in the question that you've raised, there is an element of the biggest barrier in it. So whilst yes, this is educational research, but to say that it's just teachers then starts to put a boundary in somewhere. So it shouldn't, not being either a teacher or not being a teacher with X number of years experience behind you, or not being, say, a member of the SLT, or not being a member of a specific group, or not being a member of a specific external group. Nothing should prevent you, and I think that does prevent people from engaging with educational research. So to illustrate that point a bit more, during COVID, obviously all schools went down the line of e-learning, remote learning, and Butler and I looked at the parental support and access for home-based e-learning. But that specifically was research that needed a multifaceted approach. It needed both a teacher's point of view, but it also needed the technical standpoint as well. Otherwise, it was never going to come out with a suitable solution. I think generally in life, there's a huge element of hierarchical snobbery. People want to get ahead of their peers. It's no different in educational research, but it shouldn't, like I say, be the preserve of people who have so many years of teaching experience, or who've reached some arbitrary milestone somewhere along the line. But that can fall into two forms. It can be an internal barrier. I mean, there was a phrase that was bandied around an awful lot when we first started talking about the book, which was, "I'm not mature enough for this." And I think the same thing happens, if you like, with educational research, that there's an element of people saying, "Oh, am I mature enough to do this? Am I mature enough to study this yet?" That comes through sometimes. But also there might be that block by somebody from on high, people in higher positions. Just to touch on it for giggles, I wasn't allowed to carry out my original dissertation. It was to do with reduced mental acuity and increased sexual drive in blondes. I should add at this stage that I am a natural blonde. So there we go. Yes. So
it's really interesting what you say there, because I question myself. I of this kind of hierarchical thing, and maybe that's an age thing of how old I was when I went to school, and this idea that there was a hierarchy to, like, first you do this, and then you do this, and then it's masters, and then it's PhD, and you don't get to do that until you get up to the
Yes.
next level, and this kind of hierarchy to it that maybe shouldn't be there. And when I look at young teachers coming through, or newer teachers coming through, should I say, certainly I wish I'd had a book like this, or this book sort of in my hand when I was doing my PGCE, rather than sort of finding it now. And this isn't your fault that you
Yeah, I'm sorry.
you were 15,
Sorry.
15
I'm
years
so
too
sorry.
late on writing the book for me. But I wish I'd had this kind of to guide me through that when we started, because a lot of that seems to have broken down now.
Yes, I think like I say, we need to get away from this. We don't live in isolated bubbles anymore. I think, going back to it, I'm sorry to harp back to it, but COVID has changed an awful lot of things. We don't live in this isolated society anymore. We need to be more cooperative with people, with other people who aren't necessarily teaching in classroom-based settings. Going back to the outdoor education.
Yeah, again, it comes back. Although I've gone through and I've got the assortment of qualifications, I feel for A-level students, because I failed my O-levels. When I said failed them, I got a small handful, didn't have enough to go on to A-levels, mustered through A-levels, had to do retakes. Eventually, I got to teach training college on the grades that thankfully I had. So I'm not a natural academic at all, if there is such a thing as a natural academic. But I find that the research is one of those areas that we can really open up and we can communicate with one another, as Harriet's been saying, that we can have these conversations. And most of my research ideas have come through a cup of coffee, a chance conversation in a corridor. And that's led to something. And as Harriet said about the COVID lockdown, we were almost driven together research to inform the school about how many people had resources, who had access to computers, laptops, smartphones. Could we go to live streaming straight away? So, there's this natural symbiosis, I think, that we need to look for.
And to embrace as well.
To embrace, yeah. And I think, case in point is us coming together on this book. The chances of us working in the same place and then going, you know what, we've done a little bit of research together. Let's actually put this forwards now. Let's take some of these lessons. And if it wasn't for Harriet, this book may never have come out. And you say the book came, 15 years too late. This is a book that I wish I'd had as well throughout all of my studies. It's so, in a way, it's been written for people like me. If it needed to have the two of us coming together from different angles to make it into a better thing than it could be.
And now I want to ask you a question. I'm going to try and phrase this in a way that, and it is meant as an absolute compliment before I stumble upon it. But it's not. I kind of touched on this a minute ago, but it's not written in an, I don't know how, like in an academic way.
By design.
Written, in a very kind of easy way for as I say, for me to follow through and to learn. And
yes.
and was that a deliberate choice then in the style and the tone of how you were writing it, to engage with the reader a bit
Absolutely
more? Very much so,
yes. Yeah. I mean, you've touched on it, the statement about the world's most boring book, and we use that as a catalyst to drive us to write the world's least boring book. And I think that it came through. We had several considerations to keep in mind. One I've just touched on, to write a book we would have liked to have had when we were starting out on the research. Two, to write a book that summarises our collective research experience, going over the collective decades that we've been sort of dabbling about in research. But also to provide a book that saves the reader having to go out and consult umpteen other books on research. And also to make the book accessible to anyone within education. And as we've already said, anyone could be, from, well, all sorts of spheres of alternate or alternative education. So between us, let's say we've got at last count, I think we had about 40 research books between us. Some are very well established. Some are the bestsellers. Every September they come out, and you think, oh, that book's still doing. That's the one I used 35 years ago. But at the same time, we were looking to write a book that was purposely accessible, because we've had to go through these terms and understand it and demystify research. And surely the art of any teacher or any author is to take a complex subject matter and to make it easy and accessible. So we refined all of this research down into what we've presented in our book. But we felt that there is no one book that provided a well-rounded overview to introduce a reader to the array of terms, and then to signpost them, if necessary, to other sources. If we take, for example, the aspects about statistics, in terms of statistical research, we could only touch on in 1 or 2 of the chapters about statistics, but if you wanted to develop your own psychometric, then we signpost you to the core books within that area, so that you can engage with factor analysis and do some more meaty statistical analysis. So hopefully the examples we've provided from the case studies of other researchers through the lessons learned the hard way, that we have taken a lot of experience and distilled it and put it in a reader-friendly way.
Yeah, I think to sort of add to that just very quickly, or just to sort of package that one up nicely into a nice little package, the object of the exercise was to ensure that everybody had the tools at their disposal, to get into educational research. And yeah, by using the accessible style, hopefully we've sort of started to fling wide the gates of educational research.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would hand this book to anyone. I would feel comfortable giving it to anyone that I work with within education and saying, look, this is what we're talking about. This is a really good place to start, because as I say, you said it guided me through. It helped me understand. It didn't feel like sometimes when I have felt that I want to engage with academic research, I want to engage with educational research, and I'm going to read a research article, and you feel like you're in at the deep end, and you're struggling already. This is not that. And I should say as well, this is a keeper for me, because I wanted to mention to you about the way that it's organised. I have never read such a well sort of referenced book in the lists of where everything is. There's indexes for diagrams, indexes for the photos, indexes. I could find everything in there, and helpfully a glossary as well. It's very well organised, and I wanted to ask about that as well. It doesn't feel like the kind of book, although I did read it from cover to cover.
Bless you.
It feels like one that I am supposed to keep on the shelf and dip in and out of. Is that how you hoped people would?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, let's face it, as I've said before, I'm blonde, but nobody's ever going to remember every little detail of something new when they first start out exploring, say, a new skill. Like I say, I can't remember things at all. So by writing the book in that way, hopefully it's going to help to remove that frustration of trying to find that like a half recalled idea where you've read something once and you know that you can't place exactly where, but hopefully with that sort of set out and that structure, it helps people to go back so they can then consolidate that in their own mind. Again, I'm going to go back to it, but the whole principle, the whole theory is about removing these barriers to allow quality educational research. This was just another way of facilitating this, really.
Yeah, and I think although Harriet jokingly says, she's blonde, I used to be blonde once upon a time. I'm now more grey for hair that I've got left. But writing a book, it really is a multifaceted approach. The words seldom pour out onto the page in the finished format. It's more of this layering approach, adding in additional layers to help explain concepts in a diagrammatic form, as you've touched on the glossary, we thought, well, let's put the page numbers in with the glossary as well. So if you've read a term in a research journal, you can look it up in the glossary. If you then need to go into the book a bit further, you know exactly where to go and you can read around that area. So it really was designed to be a dip into book as well. And I think the way that we wrote it was that if people could get through section 1, what is educational research? Why do we need it? The socio-cultural context that research doesn't take place in the vacuum of a school. The school takes place in a wider society, nationally, internationally, and so forth. If people can understand that, then we can get into a greater depth with some of the concepts. One thing we do is provide a juxtaposition. This sense of the research terms, and there's a lot of deep philosophical terms and how they all relate to one another. It can seem quite confusing when somebody asks you what your ontology is for your research you're doing. So we take this, we say, well, this is where it comes from, this is where it's going, these are the decisions to make. And this juxtaposition we used was citing things from something completely away from education. This was a paranormal, or looking at anomalous experiences. So something so way out that somebody could look through, not get bogged down with ideas from education, but look through and think, okay, I know nothing about this area. What does that mean? Oh, I can see how it now goes back to education. I think that that's one of the core features which took us a long time to get over, to get through, to get right. But the feedback we've had is it works extremely well. So this layering approach, we've also taken it that, imagine that somebody who doesn't know a thing about what education is or educational research. Where would we start? How would we take them through on that one-to-one? So we wrote it as if we've got one reader in the room. We're writing it for that one audience. We're writing it for you, Nathan, but you as in any listener or any reader. So yeah, really, it was written the best way that we could put it forwards, I think. Harry, is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think that kind of summarizes it.
I as I say, I enjoyed it in the way I read it, but I know that I'm gonna keep this, and because I will be dipping back into it, because we've talked a little bit there about the term research is becoming, or in my experience of the term research, is becoming more and more used, and that heightened expectation of engaging with educational research in some form or another, it seems to be growing and growing, and rightly so.
Absolutely.
But it's certainly more and more than when I started teaching. Now, I did want to ask you a question about the possible, earlier on, Harry, you sort of mentioned about when we were talking about the hierarchy and not being ready or not mature enough to it. Are there dangers of, or warnings, perhaps might be a better way of phrasing it, for amateurs, like me, trying to be more informed or trying to engage with educational research more?
I mean, what do you want?
Yeah, I'll pick up on this one if you don't
on.
mind. I would say that one of the main principles, if not the most important principle in research, is that of ethics.
Yes.
In the current climate, perhaps the words need to be revisited at all levels, from those in the public eye, leaders of the country, those in education. So if we take, for example, the 7 principles of public life, also known as Nolan principles, as a defining feature for research, how many people would be aware of these? How many people would be able to say what they were? So, these relate to a sense of selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. And that really sets the framework for things like BERA, or the British Educational Research Association Code of Ethics, or if you're in outdoor ed or PE, maybe it would be BASIS, or more psychology-based, British Psychological Society. So, all of these have got codes of conduct for research, because on a pragmatic level, if we just went out and did research and published something, what would happen if we hadn't considered the ethics? If we hadn't considered that including one child's drawing or a name, or giving enough defining features that somebody can identify the context and goes, oh, is that what you do? That could make very awkward conversations for your own line management, but heaven forbid for the press or anything. So really, it's a case of being aware that everything we do has that footprint. On a pragmatic level, how do schools implement new strategies? If they've read something in a journal article, or they hear that the school down the road's doing something, what's stopping people from going, oh, we'll do that? We would say stop, really consider the implications, discuss how it could work in our setting. Harriet?
Yeah, so I suppose I was going to sort of expand upon that a bit to say that the biggest danger, as I see it, is that once you've done your research and you've discovered something new, which is lovely, you will be compelled to act on it. You can't just put it back in its box. Once it's out, that's it, you're done. So research, the best sort, should challenge the status quo. It should make us question the things that we've previously held as gospel, maybe. And sometimes, like I say, that can make for an uncomfortable ride. For example, you might find out that you need to change your entire practice. Go back to the COVID study. We were thinking that we could go down the line in our school of doing live lessons, but actually the reality of it was that wasn't the case. It was a case of going back to the drawing board. And then there's the problem then that people can be resistant. Others can be resistant to that change that needs to be implemented based on the research findings. But we just need to remember that we always, at all times, we need to strive to be the best that we can be and to do the best for our students.
And I don't know. Like I think there is this wish in me. I guess the hopefulness of saying, like, yeah, but if I research enough, I'll find that one perfect answer, won't I? And
that would be nice.
I will find the truth, and I will be right, and it will be simple, and there won't be kind of conflicting things or things that challenge me. And I guess that there are going to be challenges.
Absolutely.
There are going to be hard questions to ask of myself and of what I'm doing. And this kind of leads me on to some of the content of the book. I wanted to ask about this definitely. Is you talk a lot in the book, or you use a kind of a theme through the book of this allegory of a quest. And the book has these references that certainly helped me out. References to Star Wars and Harry Potter, to kind of put these things. There are, I should say for our listeners, there are more highbrow examples in there as well. Ones that I had to look up, and but it really hooked me and helped me kind of understand this idea of what research truly is, more than just me reading a few online journals that I'd found. So is it okay for you guys? Can you explain that quest allegory for us?
Yes, certainly. So the first thing is kind of a bit like you said, you picked out that you almost identified with the Star Wars, Harry Potter kind of references, and other people would potentially pick up other sort of stories or other tales. There's an element of holding interest. Things shouldn't be boring. Life is far too short to be boring. I've decided this. But the most important point here is the idea of the quest and allegory. It really helps with the ease of recall of information. So think back to when we were little kids. Stories are used to teach really important points to kids. The boy who cried wolf as an example. If you have a Christian background, any listeners with a Christian background, the parables in the Bible that you might have learned as a child, the wise man building his house on the rock. As humans, we tend to remember the stories far more easily than seemingly random information that we've got no kind of real reference marker to hang it on. So that's kind of one important point. The second part of it is that we wanted something to kind of help explain the feelings that you might get when you delve into research and into the research process, feelings that maybe are kind of unusual, expected if you've not fully engaged with educational research, that notion of almost fear of stepping into the unknown, or the worry when things don't necessarily show things that you were expecting, those sorts of things. So the quest allegory was really helpful.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. Thanks, Harriet. So this allegory, it all goes back to a professor of literature called Joseph Campbell, And he was looking at parallels between myths across the world, really, and suggested that heroes and heroines globally share the same similarities in the myths. So he developed this concept of the monomyth, a series of stages. So for any listener, think about something like Star Wars, Wizard of Oz now, and think about these different stages, either within Harry Potter or any such film or book. So there's a sense for being a call to a journey. In other words, something happens, something upsets where you are at the moment. It could be something, for example, in your educational practice. So that call for journey creates a sense of unease, that you know that you need to venture forth on this and take something forward. We keep illustrating using the research we conducted during COVID. That was a sense of unease. We had to move forwards on this. And then you go on this journey was stepping over the threshold, as it was, where you meet friends, you meet allies, you meet people who can help you along the way. And certainly that's really where Harriet and I aligned our research. Although part of the monomyth is obtaining a talisman like the ruby red shoes in Wizard of Oz or the lightsaber in Star Wars, as something imbued with mystical powers, which can help. And it could be something like our book, Research Methods in Education, the essentials of, we would like to offer that one out. But there's a variety of challenges on the way. And the challenges normally come in sets of 3. The challenges could be lack of time, lack of resources, people not responding as you'd hoped they'd respond. So the hero or heroine faces these challenges, and then they face this biggest challenge. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so with Star Wars, it would be the Death Star or Darth Vader, and it's this abyss, it's this greatest fear. But it's only then when the person goes into themselves and realize they've got the strength to go through this, can they move forwards. And there are times that research can feel like this, but I put my PhD on hold for 4 years. I thought it was too insurmountable to touch, and then I came back to it. So in overcoming this challenge, they reach within, they find this power, and they become transformed through completing this quest. And then ultimately they return home with a gift, and that gift can be knowledge or freedom. So we felt that by giving this Joseph Campbell's quest allegory throughout the various chapters of the book, it can help the reader understand the research process, the feelings that they found, the maybe dead ends or the side turns. And that sense of unease that still keeps you moving forwards into what potentially is the unknown. Because let's face it, research should be something about we want to find out more about. And then rounding this all off, research should be transformatory. It should transform the researcher. It should transform practice. It should transform education in general. So sorry, but again, quite a long answer there, but it's a wonderful thing to either read Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, or next time you're watching a film, to think about these stages and how these can resonate with your own life, your own background, your own career, or your own research.
I think it is, well worth spending the time on, because it completely, contradicts this idea of research being boring. It's not, when I read that, and I was like, yeah, this is kind of how I feel. And admittedly, at points, I've felt that call to journey, and I've wanted to do something, and I've stepped over the threshold, then stepped back, and then stepped over. I agree about this book certainly. I had it placed more though as the group of friends around me, the Fellowship of the Ring. The book, it felt like that I had people to pull on and to help me along my way in finding this kind of quest for knowledge or quest for understanding, better understanding, certainly. I wanted to ask as well, the book does go through sections, and, these parts that you can pull on if you have specific questions or parts of your research that you want to find out. And you've already mentioned sort of a couple of the chapters there. But I wanted to ask about this kind of different aspects, because teachers obviously come into education from all different backgrounds and different degrees, and we've talked about that primary and secondary possible divide as well, where there may well be, you know, certainly I would expect that possibly a physics graduate might have a very different understanding of research to a sociology graduate, maybe. And I wanted to ask you about that. You know, do you think that there are parts of completing that academic research, so maybe someone studying from us is studying for a PhD, that teachers through their training maybe aren't prepared for as well, or that can come as a bit of a shock to them?
Yeah, that's a really considered question there, Nathan. Thank you. And, you know, it sounds like you're really going through this in terms of, I feel for you engaging with your research at the moment. And I guess this is where we brought in the lessons learned the hard way, to cover some of the things that we've come across in research, or those we've supervised or we've worked with have come across in their research. I think there's some consistent themes to really be prepared for. The first is the time it takes to conduct research. So you may say, well, look, the interview may only take 10 minutes, and actually half an hour in, you're only just going through the first couple of opening questions because there's so much to talk about. It could be about how engaged or even obsessed you can become with your research. There are times when I start talking about what I'm passionate about, and I can see people's eyes glazing over. But I think that's when you know you've got something that that's so fundamental to you that you're going to take through to the bitter end. It's also about how you can speak with passion about something and whether you can ignite that passion in others as well. We talk about the research roller coaster. Sometimes you'll go around in circles in research, sometimes backwards. Sometimes you may just say, look, I want to get off. I want to get on a more gentler ride. And there's nothing wrong with that, because each of these lessons, each of these aspects that you take away as a researcher goes into that mix. It makes you a better researcher. Even if you never complete your research, you've become transformed. You've got a different view on your relationship with research. So going back to this concept of the research roller coaster, you could end up in completely different places than you thought. You may think, that's where the ride stops, but actually you find yourself in a different part of the theme park, for example. So anyone who thinks that research goes in a straight line, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do next, this is what I'm going to do next, and there we go, I'll write it up and I will submit it. I've never known that. If anyone's ever come across their research being in that straight line, I'd love to get you a coffee because for you to tell me how you've achieved it. I think that when we write up our research, it looks like a straightforward journey. It looks like everything works perfectly. But what hasn't gone into it is that massive sphere surrounding it of all those lessons you've learned as a researcher. So summarizing that, the time, how obsessed you can become with it, that you can speak with passion to try and ignite others, and it's roller coaster. I know, Harriet, you want to pick up on something as well.
Yeah, I suppose I was going to, for me, I think the thing that comes as the biggest shock is when the research doesn't give you the answers you were expecting. As you say, that you end up in a different part of the theme park, I think was how you put it. But so again, and I've said it, back to the COVID study, the study showed us that we couldn't just do what we wanted to do. We couldn't just do what we planned. And I think new teachers are not particularly prepared for that things don't necessarily go to plan. So to go back, it kind of goes back to the question that you asked earlier about there being any dangers or warnings. Something seemingly inconsequential can have massive effects. Yeah, I'd say the biggest shock is when you don't get the answers you were expecting. Maybe it's for the best I didn't do my dissertation on, mental acuity in blondes.
No, I think what really interests me about both of your answers there is they're not about the practicalities of research, which I think can, or the technicalities maybe is what I was thinking, because there are some you've mentioned earlier earlier on, Scott, some scary words, and there are some scary words. I've just flipped open the book so I could pull out some scary words, not to scare anyone, but there's words, like axial coding, thematic analysis. There's some off-putting potentially for people wording and language or things that you need to do within research or possibly things that you might not even have thought about, but you're suggesting then that kind of stuff, the technical practical elements, are surmountable, and it's actually part of the journey and the engaging with what's happened that's the heart.
Yeah, you're right there. Let's go back to axial coding. We love to use these words, but what does it actually mean? It just means write a word down, summarize a sentence in a word. But why can't people just say that? And I think this is what we've tried to do, is just sort of say, look, the actual technical side, it's as formulaic as a cookbook. And I think, I'm not saying that, have we got any recipes in there?
I don't think so, not that I can.
For the second edition, we'll get some recipes in there for some cakes or something. But yeah, it really is that sense that, you can do research in a systematic way. Each of the chapters guides you through the considerations that you need to do. There's a checklist at the end of each chapter saying this is what you need to do. Then you can move on to the next section. And there's these route maps all the way through the book like that. But whereas that's taken us a collective, massive experience to distill down. Really, we don't want people to get bogged down on the technicalities. It is the more practical things like time. Harry, did you want to pick up here?
Yeah, I suppose I was just going to follow through with that the side of it that we raised as being kind of the bits that will come as a shock are the bits that people don't necessarily tend to talk about. You hear a lot of people saying, like I say, research is difficult, and so there's ways to kind of access that, but there isn't necessarily the support for those almost personal questions. It's only sort of now that we're really starting to see mental health and kind of first aid being considered in schools, and that sort of side of things being picked up on. And I think we need to make sure that people are prepared for the mental side of things, not just the technical side of research.
Yes, yeah, that's really resonated in terms of, I think about the sleepless nights when it was 4 o'clock in the morning and I was still writing up research and neglecting, friends, family, myself even. So, there are aspects like that, or people sort of dismissing your research, saying, well, who's really going to be interested in it? Is that going to earn you any more money? And the answer is no, but it's what I want to do. So yeah, there's a range which we've tried to pick up, but ultimately it goes back to that transformation. Even in those dark moments when it is 4 o'clock in the morning, you think, oh, you know what? I can see the light. I can really see the end is in sight. Look at the journey that I've been on. Look at where I've come from. Look at how I've changed and transformed. And I think that really is why we also go back to the quest. Come the end, you will be a better person.
Yeah, and I certainly, I think that part is, sort of covered off, and I felt confident with it. It felt like safety.
Good.
I think is
Thank
how
you.
I would
Yes.
describe the book. I felt
That's
safe.
good.
I feel that, on my journey, I feel that I have friends in this book, and that I feel safe, and that also, as I say, the ability to track back through it was something that I really appreciated in the way it's laid out. This knowledge that I'll have that on my shelf and I'll be able to check on it. I wanted to sort of hark back. I've mentioned this idea that research, or engaging with research, coming more and more as an expectation on teachers. And you've talked a bit about that, this finding a passion, finding an interest. And I wanted to ask about this kind of a slight juxtaposition here of it being, so my performance management or performance development or whatever we would be calling it wherever we are in the country. And I should say for those listening that I am in Wales, so we do have slightly different teachers' professional standards, where there is an expectation on things like innovation and collaboration and professional learning, possibly in a different way to in England. But I have to complete research or engage with research. So I have kind of, I am not taking that first step myself. I'm kind of kicked out the door by Gandalf at the start.
Great reference.
They've kicked me out the door and said, go off on your quest to better understand what you're doing. But we talked a little about how you see the purpose of educational research and why is it important to teachers. But is it possible then that we can say to everyone, here, you need to go and do research? Why, how do we sell that to the teachers? How do my line managers sell that to me, that actually you need to get out of your comfort zone, Nathan? You need to step outside of what you're doing and find it more.
Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, it's if I go back to the purpose of educational research, how we've defined it with the 3 E's: explore, explain, enhance, with the view of transforming all aspects, predominantly the transformation of the learners that we work with, the school or the setting or the context that we work within, the culture, how we ourselves develop it through that systematic process of thinking. So, all of this is about making the education system better. This transformation can occur from the micro, from a very, very small level, through to the macro. If I take something micro, I looked at science concept cartoons with Harriet. We were looking at, whether engaging with discussion about a concept cartoon can help learners develop more concrete understanding of physics or chemistry, through to the macro, the whole school stuff like we did with COVID with the research. So this transformation is very much like dropping a pebble in a pond. Whatever you research, it is that small pebble. Dropping that pebble, the ripples undulate outwards. They could affect someone or something or elsewhere through a chance conversation a year or two down the line, or maybe it provides us with a hunch that we do a little bit more research into. So as for the importance, I've said, I think, about education being a self-enhancing profession. And we can go back to some classic research by Robinson and his colleagues from 2009, whereby engaging staff with professional learning has the largest effect size of all on the outcome of learners. So I repeat that again, if we can really engage staff with effective CPD, then that can have a monumental effect on learners. And the effect size was twice that of focusing on learning, planning, coordinating, and evaluating teaching. It's something that's been cited by quite a few people in the past. But at the cornerstone of this would be that CPD needs to be sustained. It needs to go on. It's more than just about 1 hour after school session. There is a time and a place for that. But if we're going to make real change within the profession, we need to really engage with thinking, reflecting, discussing, and bringing all levels of the school community together. I think some of the best CPD I've ever done was when I did the Chartered Teacher status through the Chartered College of Teaching. It took 18 months to complete, but the level of what I was learning and reflecting on and working with other teachers, it was so profound. And that I can't champion the Chartered College of Teaching enough. So Dame Alison Peacock's leadership is profound. They've moved on to looking at journal clubs. They've moved on to a series of qualifications that you can start with, certificates in evidence-informed practice. So I think that in terms of selling the purpose of educational research, the transformation of a profession, how can we call ourselves a profession if we're not developing it, if we're not taking it forwards? But also, it does affect the learners. It does have a bigger imprint than most of the other things that we do.
I think if I can add to that, the thing is, the world and education, it's currently evolving. And we can't keep doing the same things that we've done before. There's always new technology coming through. Go back to COVID, you look at how things have changed since COVID. I mean, go back many moons ago, and a conversation that we're having at the moment would probably have taken place in person in a soundproof sort of studio somewhere. And that isn't the reality of the world that we live in anymore. And so the research and educational research is essential to inform how we move educational practice forwards with all the changes that are happening in the world today.
Yeah, you know what I think it is, and I think this, what it has come through, and certainly reading the book is how and I think the way, as I say, some of the way that the book is written and the way the allegory sort of develops through it, and has helped me, because the way you guys talk about research and being evidence informed and such like, and educational research, it makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, I just need to improve my teaching. That's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be working out how to do what I'm doing to the best possible way. And I still carry with me, I guess, this burden of my idea that somewhere in the hallowed halls of Cambridge and Oxford is someone in a gown who's going to tell me that I don't belong, and that I haven't, I haven't grown long enough to be able to do it yet. And I think, some of that still hangs on my shoulders, and hopefully, the profession is moving on from how I saw it. Because when you explain it in these kind of these 3 steps of, this is just getting better at teaching. This is just the way that we do it. And okay, there are some difficult words in there, but now I have the book. I can look them up in the glossary. I can find out what they mean. And that hopefully kind of helps me along and engage with it, because it certainly, as I say, here in Wales there is a big push for it, and certainly I will be recommending the book to people over here, because it is across sort of all levels, certainly in Wales, where there is this expectation that this is the way forward, this is how we improve teaching, this is how we improve outcomes for young people. We have been through a whistle stop and barely touched on some of the stuff. I should say again that there is a code, if you are listening in, for you to get 25% off the book. It's Essentials of Research Education Methods in Education, Scott Buckler and Harriet Moore. If you go to Sage Education website and you click on the link there, if you put in TTR25 as the code, you can get 25% off the book. It's well worth it, I should say. This is a keeper for me. I wanted to ask you sort of a few final bits and pieces. And certainly if you are listening in and you have questions, tweet them into us. Tweet them to either to Teachers Talk Radio itself, and we'll pin them in the space, or you can click. There's a little message speech bubble down there. If you're on your phone, you can send it straight into the space if you have questions about education research. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, as we return to our quest allegory, and I talk about this, I wanted to be on this quest. I have wanted to be on the quest. I've taken steps. I've started and stopped a master's. I started and half completed, but that was kind of COVID. I blame it in QH here. I have done I did complete actually the certificate in evidence informed practice. I did that one, but I'm kind of stepping and starting, kind of going, I want to engage, and so I'll read these things. But what advice would you give to someone who's maybe has this interest? They know that they want to find out more, they know that they want to start a quest, but maybe isn't quite getting over the threshold.
I think there are 2 things I want to highlight. The first is just go for it. Don't be put off by things. Just go for it, bite the bullet and do it. Don't be put off if when you hit that first sort of hurdle, chances are you will fall off the bike or the skateboard, in your case maybe, and it's not the end of the world. No matter what the outcome of your research is, you've still learned more about the research process by engaging with it than you knew before. So that's kind of the first thing. Just go for it. Ditch the fear, ditch the worry, and just do it. The second thing is to research what you are interested in. Now, as you say, you may be required to do educational research as part of whatever, but make sure that you are tailoring it to what you're interested in and not be forced to look at something different. You're not going to engage fully with a subject that doesn't float your boat. It's not going to happen. Like I say, my dissertation was pulled and I ended up studying something very, very, very boring. And if you're not interested, you're not going to give the research the due care and attention that it requires, that it deserves. and you're not going to enjoy yourself either. And as I've said before, life is just far too short to not enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Picking up, I would say my advice would be to get reading. There are lots of open access journals online. Every school should have a copy of Impact, the research publication from the Chartered College of Teaching. Journal clubs, that's another thing to engage with, which I've touched on. But this is where you form a group, you all go away with one paper, exactly the same journal article. You read it, come back in a few weeks' time over coffee, biscuits, etc., and then you discuss the paper. How could that work in our setting? Is there something that somebody's taken from it that somebody else hasn't actually seen within that paper? Again, the Chartered College of Teaching offers advice on establishing journal clubs, and that can lead into their certificate of evidence-informed practice. Narrowing your research focus, you can research anything. If I look through my potted CV, you can really sort of see a whole trail of where I was interested in something, then I moved on to that for a little bit, then I moved on to something else. So one of the largest hurdles, I would say, is to establish, really focus on what you want. One of the ideas or activities we use in the book is a forest analogy, where you identify a forest, you identify a tree, a branch, and a leaf. So let's say that the forest is outdoor play. You could have gone into indoor play. You could have gone into any different sort of forest of a general overview. Lots of trees within a forest. A tree I'm going to focus on is on cooperation. I'm going to take a branch. It could be something like the frequency of cooperation, and then I can look at the leaf within problem solving. So ultimately, I've sort of narrowed down and I've siphoned down to a point where I'm looking at the frequency of cooperation in problem solving in outdoor play with early years. So, if you can focus on something like that, and believe it or not, if you Google that, if you go onto a research database, you will find that people have done research in that area. And of course, the other good step would be to use a discount code of TTR25 until the end of August and buy a copy of the book.
Really nice there. You should have.
Thank you.
Bless
you. Thanks, David.
Nice, slickly
Totally.
done. It's interesting there, because you talked about a couple of things, particularly that journal club thing that maybe appeals to me more in some ways than these hierarchies. I know I've mentioned before, kind of PhDs and these or masters or awards that you have to, you feel you have to be working towards. So to engage with educational research, then it's not that I have to be booked on a 3-year award that I get a gown and a hat.
No, absolutely not. As I say, the certificate of evidence informed practice, I think it's £99 for the Chartered College website, and you could use that towards chartered teacher status, but it could just be something informal you do, or it may be that you decide to target impact, so you write an article and you share it with you take it through all the ethical protocols as we've advocated in the book, but you write for publication. Certainly early September, it's the BERA, British Education Research Association. It's a huge conference in Aston University, and it's where a lot of academics will be discussing their research. I think there's 14 practitioners from schools who are sharing their research out of hundreds who will be attending, and it would be great to see greater uptake as schools going, you know what, I'm actually proud of what we've done. I really feel that there is a floor to open that and to put that forwards. And we would say, yes, there is. Use the book, acts as a framework, and let us take you by the hand and nurture you through. So, I do think that education research is the way forwards. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of a high horse there. And you're right.
No.
This hierarchical side, I've used the phrase educational anarchist before, that actually a lot of education should come from within. We should be, strip off all these layers and actually discuss, open up, bring in people from all different perceived levels, and just get talking over a again, coffee. I know there's other drinks that are available, but at the same time, we just need to open that dialogue.
I wanted to ask then, about yourselves.
Right.
Where are you? We've got this wonderful help in the book, Essentials of Research Methods in Education, to help other people on their journeys with engaging with educational research. But do you guys have anything that you're working on at the moment, or just recently finished? What are you?
Thank you. Well, talking about this conference, we've got a conference paper based on some research we did post-COVID. So coming in from lockdown, we had, at the time I was working in the Year 6 class. I was a Year 6 teacher, and we understood how fragile students could be, that they needed to learn some of those social skills or to continue with those in a classroom setting, and even fine motor control. So Harriet and I developed something called the Mindful Movement Program. We're both engaged heavily in martial arts. My PhD was actually in martial arts and nothing to do with education. And through this, we developed a movement program that distilled some of the concepts of martial arts, and we worked them through with one class. The other class that I also taught continued with a standard PSHE lessons. And we looked at state and trait self-esteem. In other words, how your self-esteem can be affected moment to moment and also longer term. So really, we looked at this mindful movement program and how it affected self-esteem. And we noticed that this program, with all things as controlled as possible, but this program enhanced students' self-esteem. So we'll be talking about that at the BERA conference and holding a workshop on this. Harriet, is there anything else you want to say about that?
I think that sums it all very nicely.
Yeah. So, and this goes back to what Harriet said, but, really focus on what you want to focus on. The fact that we could bring in martial arts, dare I say, originally trained as a PE teacher. So, it's sort of, it's going back to my roots, really, and bringing that forwards.
I find it so interesting talking about sort of how these, because I think for teachers, possibly sometimes as we see maybe these big sort of final thoughts or final the final product maybe of years of research or of a project, and we see that final product, and maybe this is where I have been going wrong the whole time, is that I've been kind of end goal thinking rather than starting with a question. Maybe I've been kind of going, I want to I want to have this thing, or I want to find an answer to this thing, or as opposed to starting with a question and letting that research take me on the journey itself.
I think that's a danger that I know I've made. Harriet, I dare say you've made as well.
I think we kind of answered it sort of previously when you were saying when we were saying about how one of the things people aren't prepared for is the fact that the research shows something that you weren't expecting, and that's kind of a problem with being end goal focused. You've got to kind of just trust the process, really, I guess.
And even if, let's say, the piece of research I've just spoken about, this mindful movement program, even if that proved nothing, even if self-esteem didn't alter in one Year 6 class compared to another Year 6 class, we still learned through that process of research. We've learned what hasn't worked. Maybe we need to adapt the program. Maybe we need to bring in something else and then go out again. So, really, I would say, having marked hundreds of dissertations and master's dissertations in the past, but, actually, it's that journey we're interested in, not the sum product, but how you've linked all these aspects together. And if you find that you haven't proved anything, that doesn't matter. You've demonstrated your skills as a researcher, and that's what matters.
Yeah, as I say, when I think about the professional standards that I am here as a teacher in Wales, at least, expected to embody, And one of those is, about professional learning, of course, and, effective pedagogy. But one of them is about innovation
Mm.
as well. And I think it's very hard for us. There is only so many times that I can refine a process that I'm doing without starting to look outside of what I'm doing and trying something slightly different. And that idea for innovation. But I wanted to ask, we are in a changing landscape, always,
Yeah.
I guess, in a changing landscape with education. And as we come towards the end of our talk, which has been incredibly informative for me, and as I say, I couldn't speak more highly of
Thank
the
you.
book, and I would recommend that to people who are listening. But one of the things, when we think about teachers and educational research, is this one thing, maybe? What one thing, or you can go for one each, maybe, if you like, or we'll see how we go. But what would you like to see change about people in education? I will phrase this because you have rightly corrected me on saying teachers only before. But what one thing would you like to see change about people in education and educational research?
Yeah, I think the core thing for me would be to appreciate we can all be agents of change, that we can have that autonomy and agency. I'll just unpick those two. Autonomy, that throughout our career, there'll be aspects that interest us, ignite us, and engage us in that research process, and that we should be able to take that forwards with due consideration, going back to ethics again, but also to have that agency to engage in that professional discussion about research and to be heard and taking informed ethical action forwards. So, as I say, it's that sense that we can be agents of change. Harry?
Yep. So I want to pick up on the thing that you've kind of said yourself, really, Nathan. For me, I'd like people to see that educational research is not just for specific people, not just for teachers, that anybody involved in education in whatever role have just as much to bring to the table. It's really important that it includes others who aren't necessarily classroom teachers, but who play a huge part in the education of the students. And the future generations, these people all need to be involved and included in educational research. That's what I'd like to see change.
Fantastic, and I do take that away. As I think about it more and more, and just reflecting on that, I think there is something there about schools, even schools maybe who are further down this journey than others. If I was to ask them some pressing questions on, okay, so what about all staff? What about everybody? Is it that you've got some of your SLT doing a PhD or a master's, or is it all teachers, or is it all staff? I think there is another step there to open up, or certainly a line of questioning that when I go back, into school in September, I'm going to be thinking about, because we do it well, but there is always kind of room to reflect and room to explore.
Yeah, there's always room for that. Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly. Right. Well, listen, it has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you both. We should again give another plug just for that discount code for people. There is a tweet pinned at the top of this space, and if you're listening back on a podcast, it will be available on iTunes, on Spotify, on any of those platforms, however you get your podcast. So if you're only joining us now, don't worry, you will be able to get this however you consume your podcast. It will, of course, stay here on Twitter or X or whatever you choose to call it now in this ever-changing world of social media. But it will be here as well, so you can listen back again after we've finished. If you want to catch the start of the show. But if you click on that link there will be a little one that says, if you go to the Sage Education website and use that code TTR25, you will be able to get a 25% discount on Essentials of Research Methods in Education by Scott Buckler and Harriet Moore, who've joined us here tonight. There is also, if you follow and you're listening live now, there a little bit of time left for this. You should be able to find on our Twitter or X feed a little competition that we're running to give away some books. So there is some criteria there. If you find it, like and retweet and just read through there, then you might find yourself the lucky owner of one of these books, which will sit very proudly on your bookshelf and probably lend out or potentially buy them a copy. In fact, do you know what? If you're a deputy head or a head teacher here in charge of this kind of CPD, this is the book for you. You know, get a copy for the staff room or your shelf, or however it is that you just, you know, I don't know how other schools do it now, but certainly in my staff room, there will be a copy of this going when we get back in September for people to reference and to use. That's on top of my own copy.
That's brilliant. Thank
Nathan,
you.
you've been so kind. Thank you for your kind words throughout.
Honestly,
honestly,
when I read it, I was worried. I guess a bit like your friend said when I said, okay, you know, this is something that I want to do, but I was thinking, right, this is a glasses on, this is glasses and a cup of coffee. It's going to be one of those that I read, and then I started reading it, and as I say, the way that it is written, that author's voice that comes through, that kind of gently guided and explained, and when there were big words, helped me understand them. You know, I really did find it a really pleasurable read. It really did, and it'd be one that I keep on the shelf. As I say, the way it's laid out to reference back to is very helpful as well. So we're in the middle of summer holidays. Anything exciting coming up? You said that you've got the conference for the BERA coming up. Anything else exciting before the dreaded September starts again?
Well, actually, I've been in work for most of the holidays. Being technical, I don't necessarily get that time off.
Oh, no, yeah.
We were affected by a change in MIS, so I've been dealing with that with my my data manager colleague, and so we've had fun. But
all right. Well,
no, that's all right. I was just going to say mine's nothing as exciting as that, but a bit of time with kids or something. So but yeah.
Well, certainly where I am, there's at least 2 days of sunshine left, and so I am going to be heading off to enjoy.
Make the most.
Thank you again so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon. So from here at Teachers Talk Radio, we will say good night, or Nostar, as we say in Wales, and we will see you next time on our next Teachers Talk Radio show. Good night.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.